you work out physically and spiritually. I like it.
I'll tell you what, we're going to get started here because we want to spend as much time getting to know you in your ministry and talking about children and worship in particular, because this is a grad class, and if you take an undergrad class in children's ministry, you're introduced to these type of things. We kind of want to get behind the whys. I mean, why is children's worship so important, and why is, what's happening now today? And you're on the cutting edge of all this. And just as a brief introduction, I misspoke, gang. I thought I mentioned that she was a Grammy Award winner. It was actually, you're a Dove Award winner, right?
A Dove Award winner, yes.
Right, but you've been Grammy nominated.
Well, okay. In a disconnected sort of way.
Okay.
So here's where the Grammy thing comes in. So before I was doing kids music, I was just focused on making like normal CCM Christian music, going to Nashville, writing songs, talking to record labels and all that stuff. So in the year 2000, I wrote a song that ended up getting recorded by Avalon. And then it went #1. It came out on a record in 2001, was on the radio, was #1 for 5 weeks on Christian radio in 2002. And so the Avalon album that I wrote a song on was Grammy nominated.
There we go. I don't call that too disconnected. I mean,
it's not too disconnected, but it's like different hats. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's not the same as winning a Dove Award for your album, right?
Yes, for myself. And also I wrote every single one of those songs on that album by myself as well. So it's like, yeah. And I don't even know if we want to get into all that, but I will say as well, I don't know if any of you that are watching know anything about me already or not, but I went on a huge step of faith journey to make that project that I won the Dove Award for, and just had some really big revelation that God gave me in my life about Noah's obedience to become the motivation for me to step out and do this project. And so it was a huge step of faith, and just like, I literally am not the same person and not even the same Christian that I was when I started that whole process in 2019. And that project is what won the Dove Award for me last year. And so it is like, it's so cool, because for me, it's just like the ultimate kindness of God and like confetti raining down. Because there's a million reasons as to why I shouldn't have won it. And for God just to truly give me that gift and give me what really was a squashed dream, like a squashed childhood, teenage dream in my heart, with that project in particular, is just the absolute sweetest of details.
Yeah. Well, just so you're aware, Brianne is a worship leader for Christ and Youth Conferences. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of Christ and Youth Conferences.
I know so much about CIY. I worked for them doing the Superstart tour for like 9-ish years. And did the Believe tour as well. Which one are you on?
Yeah, so my husband and I have been doing Move for like the past. So we love CIY.
I know all about them.
Yeah, I'm old school CIY. I did it for about 20 years back in the 80s and 90s. So it was back when they were really small and still getting started.
That's so cool.
Well,
that's
Yancy,
awesome.
Let's pivot here and get right into this. And another thing's interesting is about you, Yancy, is that you're one of the few people in the music industry that can pull off just one name. You got people like Prince out there that can do it, and then there's Yancy. So I mean that's amazing right there. But what's curious, and what I
Madonna, Carmen, Prince, and Yancy.
Yeah, there you go. It's a small list, and that's impressive. But one of the things I want us to explore to begin with is we've been talking a lot about foundations in this class, and it's interesting to me that your father was actually pretty much, I consider him a founding father of modern children's ministry.
Yeah.
Would you like to just speak to that for a moment? How the influence of your dad, and maybe introduce your dad to to this class.
Okay. Well, and I will say, just since you just hit on the name thing. So the funny thing is I have always only gone by Yancy, which is my real first name for my music stuff. And then I just wrote a book that has released in the last 4 months or so. And the funny thing for me is now for my book and my author speaker name, I'm using all of my names, because part of it, I felt a responsibility at this point in the journey to claim my legacy. And so anyways, this is my book. I just will show you, but here's my official author name now. So I'm like, I went from a one name person, and I still am, but then it's like all the names. So
for the sake of clarity, why don't you pronounce that last name for us too? So I've heard all sorts of different. Weidman.
We just say Weidman. Yeah. So kind of plain Jane and squished together all at the same time.
I've heard a lot of different ones.
Yes, lots of people say it lots of different ways. But Jim Wideman is my dad. He started doing children's ministry in the late 70s. And that is all he did for the last several decades. He's in a little bit more of just an executive pastor role at his church currently. So honestly, it's like just this year is, I think, probably like the first time ever that he technically hasn't had something children's ministry, within his job title, management, whatever. But so definitely grew up around the whole children's ministry landscape. And I grew up going to a lot of children's ministry conferences with him, even as a kid. And just, there's so many people that would have been part of conferences, back in the 80s, and have their own independent ministries. And, still some of those friends of dad's that, still currently do children's ministry. It's just, it's really special to have known some of those people literally since I was a kid and see them doing what they do. But I realize that God has given me a front row seat in my life to see that 8-year-olds turn into 50-year-olds. Literally, like within this span of my life, and some of those just, key kids in ministry that you have a special connection and relationship with. And they are some of the people that through all the years you stay in touch and you see each other, every year, every other year, and you are part of their weddings and all of those things. And it's just, I've had some opportunities, I would say, within the last 5 years, just to really connect those dots, to realize that it is so easy for children's ministers, student ministers, anybody that works at a church to just be like so focused on, I have volunteer slots to fill and we've got to do this big event, and just be so kind of task focused on what has to happen today, what has to happen this weekend. And I have, through the history of my life, this beautiful perspective to be able to see, like, it literally is not about Sunday. It is about their future. And what it is that you're doing is truly planting seeds and impacting them and affecting the decades and the generations that their life will represent. And so
wow.
Yeah.
But your dad is considered a really a hero, a founding father of modern children's ministry. I know for me, I kind of got in and met him through the conference route as well. And we became friends, and he's just he's a genuine guy. He's another individual though, that is unique when you think about it. He's got a unique calling. Tell us a little bit about the church that he was at and what he did in children's ministry.
Yeah. So, okay. So, and I can't remember if I said this, Jim Wideman is his name. So he worked at a church in Mississippi, and then Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama. And the church that he worked at in Birmingham had a 24-track recording studio in the 80s. So this is like back when people recorded on tape, and that was a big deal. And there were a lot of big projects and stuff even that got recorded in their facility back in the day. And because of that studio, and because of even like needing to raise some funds and all this sort of stuff, like at the time, you know, he was doing puppets because people did that a whole lot more back then. And he developed this whole series called Puppet Tracks, and this training cassette that literally he developed for his own personal team, because they were like, the reason we don't practice is you're not yelling at us when we're at home. And so he made this product called Puppet Aerobics that like definitely went a lot of places back in the day. And so that was kind of a lot of what the 80s and the early 90s looked like. We moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1990 at a place called Church on the Move. Willie George was the pastor. There was a TV show for kids called Gospel Bill Show. They did a TV show for student ministry there in the 80s and 90s called Fire by Night. And the unique thing, so like, because this was also the era of like when music videos first started, and it wasn't necessarily even a common thing in Christian music at the time. And so what they would do is to get like CCM artists on that Fire by Night TV show, like their payment trade was like, we'll make you a music video, you know? And so it was like a deal the labels were like all about. So they would, you know, have an artist on, you know, including DC Talk, you know, like back in the early days of DC Talk, Toby Mac's previous successful career that he had. I love it that some people don't know that Toby Mac had a whole other successful life.
Right.
And so like Rick Kua and Petra and like just all sorts of stuff. There's a pretty famous Michael W. Smith movie or music video called Secret Ambition, and like they made that video. So I grew up in this you know, it was a church thing, but they also had all this production that was happening with the video production and curriculum that was happening. And so we moved there when the church was, I believe it was just before its third birthday. And let's say the church was like 1,500 people. And it just was growing like lightning through the 90s, and you know, definitely was a church of 10,000. Dad was on staff there just shy of 17 years. So it was an amazing place for me to grow up, because I grew up singing on recordings and, you know, being a part of these different kids things, and certainly had a lot of opportunities to develop my gifts and my talents just under that umbrella of what they were doing in ministry. But they did a whole lot of, you know, worker training. They traveled doing tons of regional, both children's and student ministry conferences, and had a national conference and all that kind of stuff. So a lot was accomplished in those 17 years of Dad being on staff there.
And
then he's now in Nashville, Tennessee at a church called The Belonging. And Henry and Alex Seeley, they're from Australia, and we have a lot of awesome artists that are part of our church and just serve and
that's
serve as volunteers. Yeah, that's where I am now too.
Which is kind of good, being in the music business, to be around all that. Yeah, well, very good. I'll tell you what, guys, if or gals and guy, if you have a question, why don't you just, there's a little signal down there, you can just raise your hand, and that lets me know that you have something you want to say or a comment you want to make. But other than that, okay, Emily, go ahead, and we'll start with Emily.
Okay. I'm going to say that I actually met you, Yancy, in I think 2015. I did Infuse with your dad.
Oh, okay.
Like your garage, and saw some CDs and your cute little son.
Oh, yes. Okay, so fun.
And so so he had like a coaching program for children.
Yes.
And so I was a part of that. I think it was 2015, a while ago. And
okay. So, was I pregnant?
A lot from him.
Okay. Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Nice to see you again today then.
Eric?
Yeah, Yancy, thanks so much for being with us. I guess my question is, you know, we're kind of a larger church, but trying to figure out how to prioritize worship in kids ministry and what that looks like. So we've tried like the YouTube videos, which, you know, have been cool in some ways, or getting one, you know, young person up there. How important do you think it is to have live worship versus recorded worship? And then part two of that would be, how do you get little ones engaged in a meaningful way in worship?
Okay, a whole lot there. So let's go just to your first question. If we're talking about kids, I honestly don't think it matters whether it's pre-recorded or whether it's live. I think at the end of the day, it's which thing can you do best? Which thing can you do well? Obviously there's always going to be flexibility that comes with doing live music and being able to chop a song down or stretch it out or a mashup or whatever you want it to be. Like, yes, there's flexibility there. But like, if you only have an acoustic guitar, there's just certain songs that are never going to have the same energy and never are going to be able to be the win that they would be if you had a fully produced track. So I'll be honest, like, just because of how my life is and the opportunities that I get, I mean, I live my life singing to tracks, and it can be done well and it can be done effectively. And a part of that is just knowing it and also strategically planning how to use those already set in stone intros, instrumentals, outros to handle the transitions how you need to. So it comes down to that worship leader has to know the material. They've got to be able to communicate to your tech people, okay, when I say this, roll the track. You know, when this other segment happens, roll the track, or don't you dare play it until I've done X, you know, like all those sorts of things. And I think, but once you do that, it can be a living thing that still works. So I back to what I just originally said, like whichever thing you can do better, it doesn't matter. And even a hybrid is fine. I think, like I said too, like it's hard to recreate the up-tempo stuff, but like if you want, sometimes I know people want to introduce that live element without having the full band in play, and so you can easily do that with a slower worship song, and it's not going to feel like, oh, there's so much that we're lacking or missing here. Like it can just be a tender personal thing. And so it's like, okay, use the pre-recording for the one and then pull in just the acoustic or the piano or that beginning thing and just start taking steps to get there and what that looks like. And let me just throw this out there. So the YouTube thing is honestly illegal because YouTube is it's a private platform. It's made for individual consumers. It's not made for classroom group use in a public setting. And so it's such a thing. And sometimes people try to throw in, because there's, I guess, exceptions for educational teacher stuff and whatever, but it's not. So you want to make sure you go and get resources from whatever publisher company. Make sure you're buying the church resource that has group viewing permissions. If you go and read the fine print on YouTube and even the YouTube Red paid thing, the fine print says it can't be done with that. So
that's good.
And I wrote a whole chapter about that in my book too. So it's a painful subject. I don't like talking about it, but God hasn't raised up other people to talk about it. So I'm stuck talking about it, at least in this children's ministry space.
Right. Brianne.
I don't want to be that person.
Hello. So my background, I've been in youth for the past decade, working primarily with 6th through 12th graders, and then recently took on the role of kids and youth director. So I'm kind of overseeing these multiple teams now, and I honestly love kids. I'm convinced it's like a million times more fun than youth. And I love
there's less attitude.
walls. That's the big thing. There are less walls, and parents are so much more involved.
Yeah.
All that
Yeah.
with worship specifically. I'm a worship leader. I've worshiped my whole life. I love worship. And I think I understand youth worship pretty well. But when it comes to kids, I think the thing I'm really hitting a ceiling with is getting participation from adults in the room. So you have certain personality types. When I go in, I can just be a kid and I have so much fun and I'm dancing around and I get the kids to come out of their shell and be comfortable. Especially when you start getting into that 4th and 5th grade range, I start seeing all those youth issues that I deal with. I start seeing them early. And in my heart, like, this is so preventable. If the room is safe for these 4th and 5th graders, they would be acting a fool and dancing and having so much fun right now. But it doesn't safe because they look around and there's other people in the room that are not safe, you know?
Yeah.
I guess my question really lands on, do you feel like it's very beneficial to have a specific worship team that has that personality that's dedicated to that? Or do you feel like it's worth really pulling that out of your adult leaders to be that? Like, is it okay to have different people working in different strengths, or do you really encourage, let's get all the adults in the room to make it a safe space?
All the above. Okay, so let's dissect this on a few layers. So for one, I think anytime you need leaders, first off, whether that's one person, whether that's a team of people, whether that's only an adult, whether it's some students that serve in that area, whether it's an adult with 5 kids, you know, all of that stuff is good. The biggest thing is, like, you need that leader to lead and navigate the time, because otherwise we're just watching a video. And what happens when we watch a video at home? Like, we're sitting on our tail watching it, right? We're not physically like involved. A couple summers back, pre-2020, so it's probably summer of 19, there's a preteen camp that I lead worship for, and you know, each session they flip-flop the room so that, you know, everybody gets a seat down center front, you know, whatever. So that particular session that morning, I had a large church that attends that camp, and their boys happened to be all the ones that were sitting like front and center. And there are times in life on stage that I wish I had a camera that I could start filming like what my eyes are seeing. And in this moment, like, the boys were so engaged, like so engaged. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I want this to be able to show other people, to inspire them that it's possible. And, you know, I noticed like one of the adult leaders, you know, had a camera out. And so like I went to them afterwards and I was like, can I please have that footage? And I guess the church actually has a pretty strict policy on some of that stuff. So it like had to go through higher levels of leadership to be like, can Yancy have the video? And I did get it, thankfully. But I was talking with their like main children's leader and emailed her and asked her some questions, actually preparing a certain breakout. And I was just like, okay, talk to me about how you get that to happen, because like most people don't see that kind of interaction. And she attributed most all of it to her volunteer teams. And, you know, they are in a space that some good worship happens within their adult congregation, but that spills over, and there is a lot of just personal example from all those that are serving. And, you know, it literally is the game changer. And so some of it is going to be vision casting to anyone in the room that helps you. And I understand some people might have some physical reason as to why they can't. Well, they might need to step out of the room during worship, you know, be in charge of bathroom duties, like, you know, like whatever. Like, we need to, if they physically can't stand or they can't do what we're asking everyone else to do in that time, that we need them to be out of the line of sight of these kids. Because that one sitter, I used to laugh. so often, like, so doing Superstart, and that this happened many times through the years in our last afternoon session. And I know these, some of these kids are tired because they didn't sleep like they should have the night before, and so we're like to the last session of this 24-hour thing, and it would never fail. Like, it'd be the last worship set, I'd come out, ask everyone to stand up, and like so many times I would end up with this one group in the front, and I would watch the same thing happen every time, where like everyone like might start to get up, that adult leader is already up, but a decent amount of their kids stayed sitting because they were tired, and the adult, instead of going to them and being like, hey, we're supposed to stand right now, sat back down, and it's one of those things, like, I'm there kind of going like, are you freaking kidding me right now? Like, you're on the third row, dead center, and you're gonna let that fifth grader like influence you to do the opposite? Like, yes, I very much judged them, but I just think it's such a domino effect. So now let me also say, like, I know you said you have more experience in the student ministry landscape. I honestly was the same way. I grew up around kids. Yes, I had served in kids worship teams, but definitely the beginnings of my professional music life had nothing to do with kids. So in a lot of ways, that's why it has worked, is I approach it all from a much more serious, maybe even more advanced place than some of my peers that are just coming at it with a different idea. I don't know. Let's not even go there. So, and I will say, because I've led worship for every age group, and I honestly feel like so much of leading worship is exactly the same, no matter the age group, like a great communicator on stage that knows how to read an audience and make sure they're getting what they're teaching. They can do that, like, yes, there's subtle changes. Like, I might change what I'm wearing, or I might not jump, in the song if I'm on Sunday morning and I'm singing a hymn, like, there's obviously like some differences there, but the mechanics of me as a worship leader honestly have nothing to do with singing on pitch and counting to 4 or 3 or 6. And if you know what I just said, that's lovely. And if you don't, it's okay, because I truly believe that leading worship is more about your leadership ability than it is your musical ability. And yes, with kids, there's a certain level of fun that's got to be there, at least in parts of it. Fun doesn't have to be a part of the equation for your entire worship set, but for some of it. And I think where some people start getting the pushback is when it's not just fun, but it feels silly. And I don't know if y'all have ever looked up the word silly in the dictionary, but it's not something you want to be. Like, it's like someone that like looks foolish and like they're an idiot, is like ultimately what that word means. And a lot of people in children's ministry, they like that word. They think being silly is great, but I looked it up.
I think a lot of that is because of again, you and we've had a long history with this. I came up in the 60s and 70s church where we weren't even, we didn't even have children's churches. We were in the adult worship to begin with. But what was interesting was a lot of the songs that we sang initially in children's church in the 80s were the camp songs, because that's all there was. And camp songs were notoriously, silly, because that was part of the camping experience, was to sing some of these more sillier songs. So I wonder how much that has, what are some, maybe historically, some of the changes that we've seen in worship has helped?
Well, there was I know what I experienced as a kid I know, you know, and granted, I grew up in my dad's ministry, but I mean, I know that we always had like serious worship songs that we were singing too, you know. I mean, it was the 80s, and you know, a lot of those 80s worship choruses were simpler songs. You know, it is a chorus. You sing the one section 4 times and call it a day, you know, or it's a song like I Exalt Thee, where yeah, there's a verse and there's a single line chorus, you know, like it was naturally simpler songs, which is something you need like in children's ministry. But and then there definitely was I think in the 90s is my guess, is when the almost over obsession with motions started coming into play. And by the 2000s, that thing they can do a song has motions to it. And it's kind of like, I know my dad said before, like there's a ditch on either side of the road. And somewhere, in an effort to be like kid friendly, so many children's ministry leaders went over here and they're in a ditch, rather than it being kind of a hybrid where we're going to do it when it makes sense. We're going to do it when it's the right thing for that part in the song. And we're also going to raise up kids to be worshipers and prepare them for what's coming next. With leaders, I don't think officers are.
I think you're breaking up a little bit on us, Yancy. In fact, you've frozen.
Can you
there.
hear me? Oh no.
Yeah, you did the classic Disney Frozen moment for us. So well, guys, the rest of you are still here, right?
Yes.
There we go. We'll just wait and see if Yancy can come back. But what do you think so far? Any takeaways?
Yeah, I love what you guys were just talking about. I'm a big Fred Rogers fan, and that was like his big thing with every, you know, when he got into what he did, is he was so frustrated that he felt like everybody, you know, wanted to make these children's programs that were just nonsense, and he's like, kids can handle real conversations. They can handle being talked to, and so that's like a drum that I beat all the time. It's like, we don't need to pie somebody in the face every week.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the big shifts. You know, Yancy was just talking there about, you know, movement and different things like that. But I saw the silly song moment, you know, and a lot of that comes out of youth ministry, Yancy. I don't know if you realize, I've said this for years, but youth ministry tends to be about 10 years ahead of children's ministry. So if you want to see where children's ministry is going, just look at where youth ministry is at today. In the 90s was where we really had the great youth ministry worship movement that emerged. You know, the Dave Crowders and the Chris Tomlins, they were all doing the teen worship at that time. And that exploded later and kind of dripped down into the children's ministry. But I got to tell you, a lot of that early, what you were experiencing at Church on the Move was the result of the Jesus movement. Those songs, a lot of those songs you were singing came right out of the Jesus movement of the 70s. But a lot of us were in smaller churches where we sang the only songs we knew with kids, and that was camp songs. You know, Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham.
Right.
You know, those are the songs we sang, and they were full of movement, by the way. So are you back? Can we go back to you?
I think so. I am in the same place. We'll see what happens.
Well, you're
Can
good
you
now.
hear me?
Yeah, and Emily, we'll get to you in a moment.
Okay, and a couple of things I just want to point out. So this was early on in my, like, once I was focused on doing kids music, I had released this project at the time called Loud and Clear. And I remember back then I had this one song, for instance, I did some motions on, and I would do it at a preteen retreat, let's say, ask them to do the motions. People would do it, all was lovely and well. And then I would be in another city in a combined ages, like children's church, do the same song with the same ask, and suddenly those oldest kids in the room wouldn't do it. And I kept repeating this scenario. The church. And so it really sent me on a journey of asking of, why is it not okay to do when the first graders in the room, if, you know, even if they're willing to do it when it's only their smaller age group. And, you know, because I've duked it out with leaders before on Facebook where they're like, my kids love the most, all the reasons why they love a buffet of that. But I was just like, well, like I know some of the secret to my success, and I processed, you know, what those results. And I was just like, if it's not okay to do when the first graders in the room, then honestly, why would I even make that same, even when it's just their age group? And so it really sent me on this journey of just kind of going, let's do it. Let's do the motions when it makes sense. And that might not mean every song. And that might mean it only makes sense on the chorus. And then we just stand and jump and jam on the verse. But by being so much more selective of when I'm asking for it, it automatically gives me a greater percentage of engagement when I do, because suddenly that same kid that would be annoyed and rolling their eyes if my entire 4-song set required that from start to finish, they'll give it to me on that chorus, because number one, I'm building relationship and I have buy-in on it, but it's also not the only thing. And I think children's ministry has reduced the participation to be a one-size-fits-all participation.
Interesting point.
And the older that they get, that's a harder and harder thing to like pull off. And some of my favorite things I've ever seen, if you even watch they're older now, but Hillsong Kids used to have these praise and worship DVDs. And even if you watch those, there were people singing on stage and there were dancer motion people. And sometimes that singer might do the motions, but they're not doing it constantly. And same thing, Camp Kid Jam. It's a camp that Orange does. Like back in the day when I helped lead worship at some of those, and it was the same thing. There were some people on stage doing motions, but there were also these other people on stage not necessarily doing all the motions. And I love that idea and principle too, because I think it's a more realistic presentation to not be saying like, all right, you better all like mashed potatoes, because that's the only thing we're serving, you know? Yeah. And let me just say this too, you know, I was a part of a VBS curriculum for a number of years. I know that companies are providing motion tutorials, because also there's children's ministry leaders that stand there and say, well, if there's not motions to the song, we can't do it. So a company makes this product based on the demands of the public, not because it's the right thing for the song, not because someone thinks, oh, this would be the best way to lead the song, or any of that. If they don't provide that piece, you know, and then some church out there isn't going to buy it. Yeah. And, you know, I know it was a person that worked in a cubicle at the curriculum publishing company that was choreographing that maybe really doesn't know what it's like to be on stage, bringing that to life and pulling it off.
Yeah.
So that being said, like, I don't put humans in my worship videos doing motions, because for me, that makes it a one size fits all scenario. And I want to put those people in that local church in the driver's seat to lead that song how they need to lead it. They know their kids, you know, they know what the other song in the set might be. And
It sounds to me like, in general, the message that you're trying to get across to us is to be intentional in our
for sure.
worship leading, you know, intentional about why you're doing this, the audience that you're doing it for. And I think that's the mark of a great worship leader, is this intentionality. Hey, Emily's had her hand up for, man, it's been since the 1980s. So let's let Emily in here and get her question and thought.
Okay.
Kind of along those lines, mentioned earlier about like wanting children to learn how to be worshipers. So like, in addition to making worship like actually doing it like consistently on, you know, when you meet on a Sunday or midweek program, like what else can we do as leaders to, like, are there certain things we should be intentionally saying, doing? Is it really just modeling, you think, at this age group, or things that we should be teaching to like help them to know what it is to be a worshiper, not that we're just like having a dance party?
Yes. Well, for sure. I believe every single week you should be giving some little nugget of the what, why, where, when, how of worship. So depending on where you are, you know, in the journey, you might be steering your ship down a new pathway, and that might require a lesson, or that might require a bigger, you know, we got to have a little mini sermon here. But once you're past that, I think every week needs some little piece of information as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, how they can do it. And the repetition of that week in and week out will build to some talk. Isaiah talks about, you know, without vision, the people perish, without knowledge. I think that could be said for a lot of Christians in the area of worship, where there's just a lack of understanding. We do worship, you know, like I'm pretty much every church in the country probably does worship. But even on an adult level, I don't think oftentimes enough we are communicating why it matters. And so, yes, teach them. And on a grand scale, let's ask of our leadership team and the other departments, and, like, you know, the powers that be within your church, like, let's sit at the same table and let's talk about this. What kind of adult worshipers do we want to have in our church? Okay, well, let's answer that end in mind question of what we want them to be like when they're out of the college ministry and just a normal, you know, adult in our church. Okay, let's then backtrack and let's start that process with an intentional playlist that plays in our nursery. And let's decide, okay, what does that look like for us as a preschool ministry? And what's the next step that I can take them then through in early elementary, a preteen ministry, middle school, high school? I mean, you get the idea. But so often church ministries are just operating as a silo, and you might have great preschool worship and you might have great high school worship, and the rest of it is a huge question mark.
So let me ask you on that, because when we were dealing with curriculum, we had some similar conversations about how we have to be age appropriate, the right point, and teach. And there was a publisher out there. In fact, it's the same one. You and I know who you're talking about as far as the VBS. But
I mean, they sold off the company in pieces, so they don't they don't exist anymore.
But that same company had this wonderful little ABCDE for curriculum, which I think applies, if you think about it, for worship. And the whole idea was with babies and preschoolers, it was about the A was attitudes. What you wanted to, if you're doing worship or you're teaching, you want it to be about teaching attitudes. What are the attitudes we need to have towards worship? When it comes to the B for children, young children, it was about beliefs. It was about beliefs. Now you can add a little bit of doctrinal, parts and bits and pieces in there, singing about who God is, who Jesus is, what the Bible is. The C was for older children. This was the decision, or excuse me, the commitments. It was making commitments, commitments with your heart, commitments with your life. The D then was a deeper, this was for teens, would be decisions. And then the E was equipping. So that's how they kind of looked at their curriculum, which I always love that outline. I thought that was a great way to look at curriculum. But as you're talking, I'm thinking that's not a bad idea for worship. If you think about how to lead the different ages, think ABC, just ABC, attitudes, beliefs, and commitment.
It's like for me, I know, and this is the beginning stages of this thought process for me, but I ended up on staff at Church on the Move for a couple of years myself. And as I was, had taken over all these different areas of our kids and student ministry worship and just kind of quickly defined a vision, I'm like, okay, with preschool kids, I want to teach them that we sing to Jesus because we love him. Preschool kids understand love. They love mama, they love grandma, they love whatever their favorite toy is. So I can teach them that worship is an expression of love, and then I can build upon that in elementary to be, we sing to God because of his goodness, like what are some of the things that God's done for you? So I think just, again, creating vision for that. And I know we're running out of time. There's a couple of things that I just want to share with you. So when I was on staff at the church, one day I came across this verse in Psalm 8:1-2 in the Message translation, and it says, "God, brilliant Lord, yours is a household name. Nursing infants gurgle courses about you, and toddlers shout the songs that drown out enemy talk and silence atheist babble." And it was one of those moments, when you're reading scripture and you're like, did that just say what I think it said? Let's read it again. And I know for me in that moment, I think it was the beginnings of increasing my own vision for what this actually represents and means. It was the moment for me where I realized a room of 2-year-olds that have snot coming out of their nose, or a 3-year-old that maybe just was throwing a tantrum because they don't like goldfish, or like whatever the snack had been, them 60 seconds later singing a chorus of how great is our God has the ability to make a person in my life that could have that atheist label attached to their name stop in their tracks and reprocess if God is who he is. Like, it let me know that what I was doing in leading kids in worship mattered, that it was holy, and that it's God ordained. Palm Sunday is, in our fresh minds here just a couple Sundays ago. And, in Matthew 21, after Jesus was on the donkey, after the palm branches were being waved, after the children were and the crowd was shouting Hosanna, Jesus gets to the temple, and then some adults ask him, "Did you hear what those children were saying?" And Jesus replies, quoting Psalm 8:2, and he said, "Have you never read, from the lips of children and infants, you, Lord, have called forth your praise?" I find it exciting that right here in the middle of our redemption story, right here in the middle of what would become our salvation story, Jesus, he's on his way to the cross and he knows it. And yet he highlights what had been written in the Psalms to let this group of adults know the power and the purpose and the intentionally created worship of children. And so when you push play on a song in your classroom, it is not just a song. You were putting praise on their lips. You were being intentional based on the lyric of that song that you're allowing them to sing. And I believe it unleashes God's power to be at work in your classrooms and spill over into your hallways and make it out to the parking lot and the family car. And that child, because music has memory and it's sticky, they randomly sing that same song when they're in their backyard playing, or when they're in their room playing. And those family members that they might have, those friends that that family might have that don't have a relationship with the Lord, often are going to be impacted by those little melodies and that sweet, pure, innocent sound of praise coming out of a child's mouth. And so, you know, when you really start studying the scriptures we have, and thankfully we have more than one, we have a handful of scriptures that specifically talk about children and praise. And if it is that serious of a thing that Jesus happened to bring it up on that crucial week, and if it's something that we know that God created and designed for them to do, then I want to do it purposeful, and I want to consider it as an actual characteristic of a Christ follower that I need to disciple. You know, we're great at discipling in the area of missions and serving and loving others and giving and like all of these other things that are scriptural as well. Like, they're good. I'm not saying that they aren't, but so many, even church leaders included, love to like skip over the worship thing as if it's an optional piece.
It's to get to the sermon, you know, or the message.
Yeah, but the Hebrew word for praise, one of them is zamar, which is musical. It's to play an instrument. It's to sing. Mm-hmm. And so there, you cannot worship with your life, as a ton of people will love to talk about. Mm-hmm. If you have removed zamar from the equation, mm-hmm. it's no longer a whole.
Mm. Interesting. You know,
and there's a lot of American Christians,
yeah,
that like to make some excuses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are kind of winding down towards the end here, but I do a lot of work with the smaller church, Yancy.
Okay.
And this is also a very common theme. What do we do if we only have a dozen kids, or, you know, we only have just a few, and we don't have the money to buy all these great resources? There's no way we can have a live band. You know, any thoughts for those who are in the smaller church here, just to be creative here and figure it out with worship and children?
Okay, I will say, like, as a performer, as a worship leader, I'm not gonna lie. Mm-hmm. The smaller the group, the harder it is.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, like it's true. I mean, the bigger your audience is, it's just more of that. There's more excitement. There's just more
energy
naturally there to work off of. Yes. So I'm not gonna lie and just tell you, like, it's a piece of cake, because it's not. On the resource side of things, I would challenge those where resources are limited to take advantage of what some awesome large mega churches that are out there are able to give away for free, because of their many tithe paying members of their church and their congregation. They're creating their own curriculums. They're even creating their own music and worship resources. And, you know, whether it's Life Church Open or Siege Church on the Move or River Valley in Minnesota, and I think Kid Spring, they're able to give this stuff away, which is amazing. Go take what they're able to give you away, but don't go doing it and against the law sort of a way.
Steal it.
I mean, that's like going to a buffet, paying for you and stuffing a suitcase full of food with you to go feed the homeless with.
Yeah.
The need is there, but that's not how to take care of
it. Right. That's a good thought. Any closing, these are grad students again that are thinking on this whole area at a little bit deeper level. You know, COVID has changed a lot in the area of children's ministry, and churches are now starting to come back. And where do you kind of see children's ministry going, and maybe children's and worship in particular going from your view? We'll give you the last thought.
Well, I mean, I do think there has been a reset, that has happened because of the time and the distance and the break for many. I remember even summer of 2020 when like we'd only been out of church for like 4 months. I was able to go and do a VBS that summer, and my youngest son was almost 4 at the time, but technically still 3. And we were on the plane talking about what was going to happen. I said, we're going to go sound check. And he was like, what's a sound check? And I'm like, I mean, only been a few months, like, and then we were at the church in an adult auditorium sound checking. And he looked up at the screen. He's like, why do they have big screens in here? And I was like, my child doesn't know what a church looks like, but I realized in his little life, that was like an eighth of his existence that now had been void of it. And so, and that gap for some people, and depending on your region of the country, depending on that family, like it's bigger and bigger. And so they're coming back in and it's a negative and it's an advantage all at the same time. They don't have the muscle memory to necessarily remember what it was like or how you do or what's honor and reverent, at this time. And so it is a reset button, and it's also an opportunity to just start afresh and start teaching them and just building into them those things. But one thing that for me became increasingly obvious in that COVID time and so many churches being online, I think it applies live as well, but I realized on video it mattered. What's your invitation? Because just segueing to a worship time, when I'm sitting on my couch, let's be real, I'm not going to engage with you like I maybe would in that room. And I realized, whether it was kids programming or even adults, that thinking about what it is that I was drawing them in to do and what I wanted to communicate of how they could participate with me in that moment mattered. And I think that is still true even in a live setting. It just was magnified online. I don't think I'm an in-person church girl by all means, but I don't think that online church is going away. And honestly, I think more online kids ministry things are needed for various reasons, whether it's just they have a kid that's sick this week. Well, I know for me as a parent, I want the resources to still make sure my preschool kid gets something in the right bite-sized piece for his age group, and my 5th grader to still experience stuff. And so I do think there's more things that we need to make available to our church families, not to take the place of church, but just to fill in those gaps when they've got valid reasons that they're there. Like, I'm not talking about the people that come once every 5 weeks and think that they're regular, but just even some of those people that miss, it's like, well, I still want to make sure my kid gets that meal this week. So I don't think that's going away. And I think there's probably more that we can bring to the table to come alongside parents in that way.
I found the whole COVID moment with worship very interesting, Yancy, because, I'm sitting on the couch watching a worship, and I don't feel comfortable singing from my couch. I have to have voices around me and hear the voices. And really, it kind of exhibited what I felt as a man a lot anyway. If you go, a lot of churches, you go look, a lot of men don't sing in the audience. It's their wives that are singing. It's the women that are singing. And I find that interesting because, as a man, I struggle sometimes being on tune and singing it right and all that. But, in a lot of larger churches, you can drown out that with just the noise or the what's coming from the stage. But, when you put us in a living room, it becomes a different thing. And what I experienced and what I saw with online church is that a lot of people began to skip the worship service altogether. they would tune in. They figured out that the message was 20 minutes in. So you'd see the numbers rise about 20 minutes in, which I thought was an interesting phenomena. People, and then the minute the message was over, they would actually leave. You'd see the numbers dive again as far as the people at the screens. So, well, you know what? This could be a part 2 conversation, couldn't we, on just some of that stuff? But I want to say thank you for taking your time again to be with us today. I know these students appreciate it. We're a small class, but we're a dedicated class, and we're talking about a lot of these conversations. Did you have one more thing you'd like to say?
Well, I just want to tell you all about a couple of things. Okay, so I'm not just trying to push my book, but there's so many things that we could have talked about that we certainly did not have time that are in this. There's a lot of heart, there's a lot of passion and vision, but there's a ton of practical stuff too, building worship sets, introducing new songs, preschool worship, the motions, like so much stuff. So I know this would be valuable reading for you. And then also I did a curriculum called Heartbeat that is 5 full children's church lessons to help you teach kids about worship, because I knew so often, like, in a Q&A time like this, I can give you my answers, but I knew that leaders were walking away still where I'm like, they don't know what to actually say to their kids, of how they know the issue they perceive, but they don't really know how to communicate it. And so feedback on this has always been absolutely amazing. And we know that it's not normal for you to not have any hate mail in modern culture, and people only write and say nice things about this. And so I know this would be helpful. I had a senior pastor teach it to his whole church, like during COVID. And I've had people that have like taken elements of it and, done part of it even with student ministry and whatnot. So no, that's possible. And then y'all might already be familiar, but Little Praise Party, the cartoon Yancy, is what I do for younger age kids. Those songs are way more simple and active and repetitive. And then Kidman Worship is stuff for preteen and elementary. So would love to help you get some things that you need that you can put into action. But the book would be a great.
All those?
Yancyministries.com. You can go to Yancyministries/Sweet Sound for the book. And if you remember, Yancyministries.com/readysetgo for take you straight to Little Praise Party stuff. So
we'll put that link right there on this video here later. But Yancy, again, it's just good. First of all, I think this is, we've met before just in crossing or passing, but I don't think I've had an opportunity to have this type of a deeper conversation with you. I really admire the work that you do, appreciate the work that you do in children's ministry, and just ask God to continue to bless you in this calling, this special calling, unique calling that he has guided you to participate in. So thank you again.
For sure.
And guys,
you bet. Thank y'all.
You bet. We'll see you next week.